You're listening to the Sass Says podcast. I'm your host, Christy Rocha, also known as Sass. I identify as a woman, a wife, and a mother. That should tell you a lot already. And over the last few years, I've learned the value of talk therapy. I have seen how my inner work not only enhances my own well-being, but also my marriage, my parenting, my relationships. And in fact, you wouldn't be hearing this right now if it weren't for the work I've done. My mission is to debunk the misconceptions and stigmas around what therapy is and who it's for. Let's normalize working on our mental health and seeking help when needed. We've all heard of self-care, self-help, and self-love, but do you often wonder how to actually make it all happen? I do. You'll hear strategy-based conversations with professionals, as well as inspiring and validating stories from women who are just like you and me. Think of this podcast as the weekly therapy sessions you didn't know you needed, with a dash of sass, a lot of vulnerability, and me, relentlessly asking, but how? Hello. My guest today is Brooke Randolph, a licensed mental health counselor and founder and director of Counseling at the Green in Indianapolis, Indiana. Her specialties are adoption therapy and developmental trauma, brain spotting, and relationships. She's the author of 3 workbooks for kids, one on bullies, another on loss, and a third on making choices. Don't worry, I will link them. As well as a contributing author to Adoption Therapy, Perspectives from Clients and Clinicians on Processing and Healing Post-Adoption Issues. She's also the organizing editor of It's Not About You, Understanding Adoptee Search, Reunion, and Open Adoption. She was a founding member of MLJ Adoptions, Inc., where she served as the VP of Social Services for 7 years. Brooke was an advisory board member for The Villages, which is Indiana's largest not-for-profit child and family services agency. She was also the interim vice president of PR, outreach, and communication for Kids First Adoption Services. And last but certainly not least, Brooke adopted an older child internationally as a single mom through a pilot program. So, Brooke knows her stuff. This conversation was mind-opening, mind-blowing, and makes me want to jump into advocacy work each time I listen to it. Brooke talks about her personal story with adoption. She gives me a brief history of adoption through the decades in the U.S. and shares some of the failings of the current adoption process. Brooke talks about adoption in a variety of contexts and offers generalized perspectives of birth parents, adoptive parents, and adoptees, all from her professional experience. All right, here's Brooke. Hey, Brooke, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Absolutely. It's good to be with you.
I feel like I'm in that situation where I have so many questions, but I also know that there's questions that I don't even realize I have yet that are going to come up on this topic. So I appreciate you and your willingness to come on here with me, as I'm fairly ignorant in this arena, but I want to know more.
It's a great way to start.
Yeah. So I think maybe I'd like to start with, if you could identify some of the most common stigmas and misconceptions about the adoption community that you would love to see just done away with.
Oh, wow. So I think it probably depends on who in the adoption community.
Okay.
And I would say in the adoption community, there are stigmas that get passed between us. So that sometimes adoptive parents and adoptees and biological parents don't always work together and sometimes try to work independently. And that's not always true. I mean, there's some great organizations out there that are uniting adoptees and parents, that triad groups, organizations that are all working together, and individuals that like to work together. But when we think about stigmas, I don't know. Where do you want me to start?
Anywhere. Because I don't know. I want to know everything, and I know it's a huge topic. So wherever you feel most pulled, I'm good with it.
Okay. Well, so there is the stigma that biological parents or birth parents, depending on the details of that story,
Mm-hmm.
but that they were young and poor, that they or maybe the dream scenario is the stigma that it was like this really smart, talented young girl who just got herself in trouble. I mean, you can just hear already these ideas that are in our culture, and yet what are they communicating?
Mm-hmm.
That we're in trouble because there's an unplanned pregnancy. So I would think that's a very like general thing.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about adoptees, there's the stigma of the angry adoptee who's just mad at the world and mad at everybody and can't see past their anger, um, which I don't see it's true. Um, Not in the majority of cases at all. But what that means is that when an adoptee presents with anger of any kind, that they can be dismissed because then they fit within this stigma. And so then people can dismiss what they are saying because of any emotion that is perceived in it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we think about adoptive parents and the most common stigma, because of course these are just like the top stigmas.
Mm-hmm.
The most common would be the white savior, the white Christian savior who's going to come in and just want to like make everything better with love. And they are colorblind in the negative view of that
Mm-hmm.
term and just want to hope that love changes everything.
I'm just laughing at the tone of your voice.
I mean, and not that these things aren't true of some people at some times, but they are exaggerations, like any kind of stereotype in our world. They are exaggerated at best,
No.
and just simply false in a lot of cases. But when we deal with these stereotypes or these stigmas, then we're not seeing real people. And we can't, there's not a lot we can do when we're not seeing real people. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, depending on who you are and what your goal is, like therapist, you can't do any good unless you have a real relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But also in the idea of like changing hearts and minds, getting people like building up advocacy. If you're dealing with someone based on your stereotype of them, then you're not going to be able to communicate to them. You're not going to have a real relationship, and there's nothing that really changes.
That is so powerful. Just those one or two sentences alone there, because it spans. I mean, I don't want to take away from this topic, but it's any cause, any topic, any human being. I mean, everyone has a story, and it's yeah. You said it so beautifully. I don't want to mess it up. So okay, so I want to go back a minute, and I want you to open my mind a bit. So you started with the stigma or the stereotype of the birth mother as being kind of this young girl in trouble. I just watched a crime show on television last night with that exact scenario. And, you know, what else are you seeing? Who is who is a birth mother, and what do we not know about her that you would want her to know, want us to know?
Well, oh, there's so many things. One, the even if we were talking in generalities,
Mm-hmm.
we have to narrow in based on generation
Okay.
because the adoption that is occurring in 2010 is not the adoption that occurred in 1990, is not the adoption of 1975, is not the adoption of 1950.
Hmm.
Like they are all like there were different things happening, and that's just looking at the United States. There have been similar patterns throughout the world, but just looking at the US is probably a good place for us to start.
Okay.
And so There is what's called the baby scoop era in the US, and it's similar things called by slightly different names in different countries. Um, but that like post World War II, moving towards the late 70s, um, when single motherhood was frowned on in society, and there were laws that really coerced a lot of women into making an adoption plan. Or in some cases, really, they didn't even coerce, they just lied to them and took the babies.
Wow.
I mean, there are some really interesting, sad is the truth. Interesting is too positive of a term.
Mm.
But there's a lot of stories out there. And Gabrielle Glaser just wrote a really popular book called American Baby that's in reference to all of this time. That would be a really accessible thing for people who wanted to learn more. There's also a slightly older book called The Girls Who Went Away. And so understanding that in that time period, the experience was very different than, a couple decades later when women are making a choice
Mm.
whether they are going to parent or not. Now, there is some level of that choice is not um, a completely free choice because there may be financial means,
Mm-hmm.
and there are even financial incentives for making an adoption plan. But there was at least more of a choice, more protections for them. They generally got to, and this is when we are thinking about domestic infant adoption. And then we can go in and separate out like the world of foster care and child welfare and how that all plays into it. But in the domestic infant adoption, the expectant mothers would look through profiles of prospective adoptive families and generally choose one that they wanted to be the parents for their child.
Mm-hmm. God, it's like it's such a big topic. I mean, it's oh my goodness. Okay, I'm feeling overwhelmed by it, but I want obviously want to keep going.
That's
um,
okay. And interrupt anytime you like, wait a minute, let's dig more into that. I
yeah.
can, that's
Okay.
fine.
Okay. All right. So I guess. Oh man. All right. And then moving towards the angry adoptee, like what in your experience now with you, I mean, you work with kids or mostly adults, or who are you working with?
Therapeutically, I'm working with mostly adults,
Interesting.
and some of the adoptive parents. Um, but I've done a little bit of all of the work, but at this point, my focus is mostly working with adult adoptees.
Okay. All right. So let's do that then. The stereotype of the adoptive parent being this savior, the white savior, the religious aspect
Mhm.
of it, tear that down. Who else is actually stepping up and adopting kids? What and why are they doing it?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, so the why I think is really important, and then that kind of plays out all the other pieces of it. But some people are adopting due to infertility. They want to be parents. They don't have a biological way of doing that, and so they are making the choice to move towards adoption.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are adopting because um, they may have some health or mental health reasons that they don't believe biological procreation is the right choice to build their family.
Hmm.
Some people are adopting because they believe they should, because it's a good thing to do. And this gets like into various levels of saving the children, um, uh, missionary work through
Mm.
adoption, um,
Hmm.
and other kinds. And like churches, I think we've come to the other side of this, but for a while, churches were telling people that they needed to adopt.
Hmm.
Um,
That can't always lead to positive outcomes.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Um, that was very succinctly said. And also, then the churches weren't providing the education or support that was necessary to make that a successful
Mm.
um, situation.
Yeah.
So that had its own concerns.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I mean, I think I should be very transparent and put myself out here is that I adopted in a place where I knew that there were children who had no other choice and that
Mm-hmm.
I had the means to share.
Yeah.
And that was what moved me towards that. Um, and I think that's an important, um, that transparency is important when I work with adult adoptees, even if it's not as my clients, but just in kind of general advocacy work,
Mm-hmm.
is kind of I need to have that level of transparency to have trust because there are adoptive parents out there who have had very selfish reasons,
Mm.
and that there is skepticism towards, why did you do it? And I would say a healthy skepticism towards any reason, like, uh, you
Yeah.
know, assuming it's not necessarily a great reason.
Yeah, man,
Um,
I can't. I mean, it's not a small thing to just do to adopt a child of any age to take that on. I can't imagine. I can't imagine what's going through someone's head to do that for, I don't know, the wrong reasons or just misguided reasons. I mean, it's hard for me to believe. It's hard for me to imagine, really.
well, I mean, people are people.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, like, there's going to be people who have, misguided reasons because they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah, for anything, right? Yeah. Yeah.
And 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 while we would like the system to, kind of rule that out or educate to prevent that for the protection of the child, the problem is that a lot of these agencies and organizations get into the mindset that being in a family is the best choice for the child. And so when you put that as the top priority, then it becomes any family
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
any willing family.
Yeah. Oh
Um,
man. Yeah. Are you? I mean, okay. So, ooh, I want to. There's like four different directions my brain wants to go with this. As an adoptive parent, and you can either speak of your personal experience and in conjunction with your work, whatever you want. What are some challenges that adoptive parents face that may not be so obvious?
Um, well, I would say the general population probably doesn't realize the level of trauma that is created by early parental separation. So when I say early parental separation, I mean any separation from the biological parent.
Mm.
And we can see this even in young children who were hospitalized. They were never legally separated from their biological parents, but they may not have had the time that they needed based on that developmental stage, and that can play out in very similar traumas. But when we have um, any case from the the adoptive parent caught the baby coming out of the birth canal to um, even separation as a teenager, that is still early parental separation, and that it causes um, some pretty clear trauma to the brain and the body. And so the general population may not realize that um, for adoptive parents that we are dealing with kids who've had some trauma and that there are special needs, and everything's on a continuum.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's more clear at younger ages and sometimes it's more clear at older ages, and some people do a really good job um, functioning in their family because that's what they believe is expected of them, and then struggle when they get to adulthood.
So what would that look like? What are some examples of how that trauma might manifest for someone who has no frame of reference for what you're talking about?
Um, it may be heightened fear or separation anxiety. It
Mm.
may be things that look younger than their chronological age. So why are they still doing that?
Mm.
Um, aren't they too old for that? It can be issues around food and always feeling hungry or feeling like food's not going to be available. Um,
Wow.
it can be, also rejection of a parent,
Mm.
um, not wanting to be near them
Yeah.
for lots of potential reasons.
Yeah.
It can play out in lots of ways.
Hmm. And
And it also
go ahead.
plays out in learning disorders and things like ADHD, which is hugely related. Um, and so other things that people may see as um, they may not typically relate to trauma. Um, it can play out in that way.
And so I know this question may come off a bit off-putting, but you have a kid, you I don't mean you, I just mean in general, say a school, a teacher has a student and they're noticing, maybe it's the ADHD, let's start with that, and they know that this child was adopted at some point. Where, like, I guess what I'm getting at is in the process, in the journey for these kids and the parents, where did they start to say, okay, this is where this is coming from and this is how we get through it? Like, I imagine that even there must be adoptive parents who may not realize that that trauma is connected to whatever the child is doing and saying and sort of acting. And
Hmm.
I don't know, I wonder, I guess, I don't know if I have a question, I guess, but I guess it's more,
Well,
go
I
ahead.
would like challenge the system in that there are ways to change the way that the system works so that it works better for all children. So Heather Forbes, I believe, and you can edit out me saying her name if I got that wrong, wrote the book Help for Billy.
Okay.
And so Help for Billy is a book written to teachers that kind of compares this typical child who's achieving well and child A and then child B who has some ACEs, some adverse childhood experiences, which could include adoption, could include trauma, could include other kinds of things. But knowing the trajectory for that child in school
Mm-hmm.
with a typical school system and seeing how they just go these opposite directions.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas we can change the system instead of like making like a specialized plan for this individual child. If we do small things to change the system, just to make it um, nurturing,
Mm-hmm.
aware of differing needs, that more children can be successful without there being major changes.
Yeah.
I feel like it would be so much easier for teachers to just have one system that was meeting every kid's need, um, than to try to create a specialized plan for these other children who are struggling.
Yeah.
And then there's organizations like the Attachment and Trauma Network who do a trauma sensitive schools conference every year and do amazing work in teaching administrators and teachers on to how to do that, how to meet those needs.
Mm. So you did have that right. It is Heather Forbes. I just looked it up as you were talking. And do you have some ideas of your own on how that system can be changed?
Oh, I mean, the simplest things that would be so easy that I wish every teacher would do is that in between transitions or like to help with the transition that they are doing some sort of sensory activity, that they work at transitioning well,
Mm.
at giving the warnings, explaining what's going to happen, and then everyone doing some gentle exercise together that is providing the sensory input that is generally calming to
Mm-hmm.
children.
Mm-hmm.
And that some of the, like, they don't even have to get up from their desk. You can do these things called a chair push up or a chair pull up, and the kids are barely moving, but they're getting that that joint compression that is getting sensory information that can be very calming to children who may need that.
And the connection is that a child who has may have experienced trauma, or just, I mean, any kids, I don't know, kids are so aware and just go through, I think, so much more than we realize. But
Mhm.
the connection is just throughout the day, taking that time to let the kids slow down, let the kids um just, I don't know, like it almost feels like get the system moving, like the same way for an adult where you might take 5 minutes to do a meditation or breathe or go for
Yeah.
a walk. It's the same idea is what you're getting
Hmm.
at.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I think the majority of the time, um, what kids need is um, water, nutrition, exercise, sleep, deep breaths. And you can help regulate when things are getting out of control.
Regulate.
First,
Yes,
hand them a
that's the
glass of
word.
water.
Yeah.
Make sure what we've eaten in the last 2 hours,
Yeah.
something nutritious, not candy. You
Right.
know, let's
Right.
do some exercise.
Right.
Make sure that they got enough sleep the night before.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
all of the things that we need to be doing in general, taking deep breaths
Mm-hmm.
would, and there are things that we know our kids need because we know we missed out on it. So,
Mm.
as an adult, if you reflect on your life and you are learning to meditate now, or you are learning to take a break and take deep breaths, these are things like people are teaching you as an adult. But how much better would everyone's life be if we had just integrated those as habits that we
Yeah.
learned as children in the most basic things that we need,
Mm-hmm.
instead of saying like oh, we get to stay up late, but to really value making sure we're well rested
Right.
and how much better we all function in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I still struggle with that. Like, I just don't want to go to bed early. I just don't. But that's a whole other thing. Anyway, thank you for that. I appreciate that. I'm wondering now, as you're talking, um, you know, talk to, well, you are talking to me, but talk to me and anyone like me who, let's say, you are with your son, and you're at the mall or you're at the park, and you meet another mom. Like, I can imagine that there are a plethora of please say this, please don't say that, when someone learns that the mother and child, whoever is there, or whoever is there, the father, the parent, just whoever it is, that there is an adoptee present. Like, I just, talk to me about what I would or wouldn't say if I met you and your son at the park.
Sure. So I would start with always think about this child is listening, and what is this question or what is this answer speaking to this child's identity and experience.
Mm.
Um, and so, like, I don't ever want people to adopt a soldier or an adopt a highway or adopt a dog, because those things create questions in children about does what is my relationship. If my
Mm.
relationship's formed by adoption, but you're only visiting this highway once a month and putting your name on it, what does that say about what adoption is? If
Jeez.
you're only buying gifts for this family at Christmas and then you never speak to them ever again, what does that say about adoption? That those things aren't adoption.
Mm-hmm.
That's just people using a cute term.
Hmm.
Um, those those are, sponsoring maybe.
Yeah.
Um, and that because of the early parental separation, regardless of the reason, that there is generally a higher anxiety and a higher anxiety around relationships. And so just being aware of that and how we're talking about things. Um, Using terms like real is pretty common and pretty confusing to kids.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Is that
I,
offensive to you?
it is not at all offensive to me, but it is bothersome to other parents.
Yeah.
Um, I always understood that when a child says things like, "You're not my real mom," or "I wish I wasn't a part of this family," or whatever those things are, that it's the same thing as children raised in biological families who say, "I wish I wasn't a part of this family," or "This
Right.
family's awful," or "You don't understand," or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is. I think many of us probably mouthed off to our parents in one way or another. I usually did it with the door closed, but I was still saying the things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and so as adults, we have to recognize that kid talk is kid talk,
Yeah.
that kids have a hard time managing their emotions. They have a hard time in relationships because it's new for them.
Mm-hmm.
And they they don't they're just saying things to try to get whatever they want.
Right. Yeah.
That's what kids do.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. It's
so
more about the parent having to regulate themselves in that moment.
absolutely, because it's not, they're going to say what they think works. And so if you get upset by that, then they're going to say it.
Jackpot.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
if a child thought that you were insecure about like your ugly feet, then they would probably talk about your ugly feet.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's just the way it is.
Kids are
Um,
fun.
Kids are so much fun. Um, I think they're so much fun because they're such a great way for us to see ourselves
Yeah.
and recognize, like, oh, I didn't like that.
Right.
What in me is responding to this little child? Um, and also just to recognize, like, oh, yeah, I do that too.
Mm,
Like, as adults, we're really just big kids.
yeah.
We're not that much different.
Yeah.
So,
So with okay, so that
mhm.
it also made me think when as I asked you the question of, hey, I meet you and your son at the park, and the topic comes up, what do I say, what do I not say? I also realized that actually at the age, I mean, your son is 14, he's probably not at the park anymore. At the age where I would be at the park with someone, that child may not even know yet. So
Oh,
what do you
yeah.
say about what do you say about that? Like what do you believe as far as telling the
Mhm.
child when, how?
You should be telling them before they have the ability to process it so that you are never telling them. It should never be a conversation that they remember. That should be something that they always know.
Wow. Yeah.
And I know that there are people out there who didn't do that for whatever reason.
Hmm.
And so the answer is as soon as possible.
Okay.
It's like you got to do it because the longer you wait, the more damaging it is going to be to your relationship.
Right.
And there are really important things about identity development where kids need to have that information before they start puberty,
Mm.
before those hormones start going. And I know that some kids are starting puberty at very young ages. They need to have their full story, ugly details and all.
Yeah. And I mean, I can imagine that the probably one of the most devastating things would be risking that they would find out from someone other than their parent.
Yeah, I mean, that's so damaging to a relationship.
Yeah, the trust, right? Like
hmm
just yeah. Oh my goodness. Okay. Um yeah, and all right, so talk to me about the adoptee who now grows up and wants to start his or her own biological family. What are some of the feelings, issues, challenges that might come up for them, and how would you help them cope?
Oh my, there are so many. Um, I mean, first there is when you're thinking about starting a family, it's the intimate relationship. And has your, the early parental separation is a damaged relationship, and how have you worked that out in your relationships growing up?
Mm.
Um, and then who do you choose? And um, generally, but not always, the relationships we choose reflect the family that we grew up in. And so that when we think about transracial adoption, and that we're choosing someone who may look like our adoptive parents, look like the family we grew up in,
Hmm.
and that may be what is most comfortable immediately, but um, racial identity development may change that.
Hmm.
And so you may be in a relationship and then start to discover yourself as a person of color more. And what does that mean? And you know, and for some people they have realizations about their identity and about adoption when they are pregnant or when they are giving birth. That meeting their own biological relative, possibly for the first time,
Right.
um, can can kind of open up those things.
That must
There's
be
so
quite,
many pieces.
yeah. I mean, even just what you just said alone, possibly meeting for the first time a biological relative as your kid. I mean, that has got to be heavy, awesome, sad, wonderful. I mean, the mix of emotions that must go on for someone are probably endless.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, so talking about, do you find that there are tendencies for adoptees who grow up and want to start families to then also adopt, or is it that they prefer to maybe have a biological child if possible? What does that look like?
I think it's pretty mixed, and it's really going to be based on, um, I would say, the development of their adoption identity. How have they processed adoption? Where are they on that journey?
Mm.
Um, and because it is a journey that usually people don't have like one perspective throughout their life, that they may have more or less peace at different times around their story at different times in their life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is there a difference, a notable difference between? I'm thinking of. I'm just thinking of this case of, an adoptee then becoming a mother or an adoptee becoming a father. I feel like is there a noticeable difference in gender when it comes to adoptees and then starting their own families, or even just in general? Is there anything noteworthy about gender?
That's a great question. As far as having biological children, I haven't seen a separation based on gender in that way.
Okay.
The bigger gender differences tend to be in um, externalizing versus internalizing kind of behaviors as kids. Um, and then in the timing of search, that men tend, not always, to be a little slower in searching for biological family.
Mm, okay. And then as far as the adoptee thinking about processing their own their own life, their own journey, are there things specific to their birth mother and versus the birth father?
That's a great question. Generally, the focus tends to be on the birth mother first, until they have uh, information there.
Mm.
Um, and sometimes the information that they really want is having an interaction with that person.
Mm.
Um, And generally, interest in the birth father comes later after they are like the birth mother relationship tends to be primary.
Yeah. Do you do you encourage the searching and the I don't know, the searching for the information and the connection if someone wants it, or how do you feel about that?
Well, that's a tough answer. I would say if they want it, I am supportive of it, but I don't know that I would necessarily say that I encourage because a it's a big endeavor. It
Yeah.
is an adventure because you don't know what's on the other side.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even matter how much like Facebook stalking we do and we think we've got a read on somebody
Right.
that because for sure my clients are bringing up their biological family's Facebook page in session and we're
Oh my
checking it out.
goodness.
Um, but as you think about, well, how am I going to approach this person? And this is public information that is helpful
Right.
in knowing what do I say and how do I say it.
Hmm.
And so even when we think we have a really good read on somebody, they may surprise us
Mm-hmm.
and be less open than we anticipated.
Yeah. So, as someone again who has very little, knowledge of this arena, what are some of the potentially logistical challenges with the adoption process that I might be surprised to learn about?
um, so the process of adding a child to a family.
Yes, sure.
Okay. um, so I mean that gets complicated depending on which perspective you're coming from.
Mm,
I think prospective adoptive parents see the cost as a complicating factor, and I think adoptees will see the cost as I don't have the word is escaping me at the moment, but like signs that there's something illicit going on,
mm,
that people are making money here. And then I have enough information about how agencies work to know that there are some agencies where people are making lots of money off of this, and there's a lot of agencies where they are, doing their best to keep the lights on and provide good services.
so where
And so I think
yeah.
that's super complicated.
Yeah. Like so I I'm not this might be a silly question, but how does one make money? Is it like it sounds as if we're not saying selling human beings. Like what? How does that
Well,
work?
right. So we're gonna assume best intentions that no one is trying to really traffic, and that there are fees that are related to court costs, and there are fees
Ah,
related
okay.
to attorneys, and there are fees related to like a home study, that a social worker needs
I
to do.
gotcha. Okay.
Um,
Okay. Phew.
but then, there's an agency fee
Right.
for like the paper and the website and all of those to cover those kinds of costs.
Hmm.
And somewhere in there, is a profit margin.
Okay, that makes sense. I thank you for spelling that out for me because I
Yeah.
was like, "Whoa, where is this going?" um, how can someone who's interested in being of service or being involved in this world do so?
Oh, so I guess I would want to know for this individual, what kind of service do you want to be? And what's your passion and how do you want to help? Because there's a lot of advocacy that we need. Um,
Okay.
Helping make sure that all um, international adoptees actually have citizenship in the US, because some from um, earlier time periods don't actually have citizenship.
Mm,
That's a problem that there's an act in Congress right now. We need some advocacy about access to original birth certificates. And in many states, that is not something that adoptees can access.
Wow.
Um,
Why?
well, I mean, we could get into the history and it gets very complicated
Okay.
on how like they originally sealed records for the adoptee to get when they wanted it, but then it became a thing where we're sealing records so that we are hiding adoption because if you think back to like the 50s and 60s when people wanted to have this Donna Reed kind of presentation in their family,
Mm-hmm.
we would hide the fact that this teenage girl had a pregnancy prior to marriage. And we would hide the fact that this person didn't have a biological child
Mm.
by amending a birth certificate.
God, that is wild.
That is what is most common throughout the world.
Wow.
That is only in, oh, I just wrote this down. I think it's only in Australia that they now have a like, I don't even remember what they're calling it, integrated birth certificate. So that would include both the biological parents and the adoptive parents on
Mm.
it. I haven't seen one personally, but I would like to
Yeah.
because that's and what I had suggested mildly because I don't think the government is any place to hear it, um, but would be an adoption certificate that we maintain the original birth certificate as a birth certificate, and then we have an additional adoption certificate.
Right.
And I seems seems obvious to me,
It
but
does,
like things
really.
like the school or the doctor, all they really need is that adoption certificate to say like, yes, this is the parent.
Right.
Um, and
God.
that's what they're using it for. And so things like getting a passport, proving identity in that way that they need the birth certificate, fine, but we don't really need to be sharing that anyway. So I don't, doesn't seem to be like stepping on any toes in any way.
It
I
is.
mean, on that note, I think it's an interesting note. So I adopted my son internationally as an older child. Um, so he was 6 at the time.
Mhm.
I have 3 birth certificates for him, 2 from his country of birth, one that has his biological parents on it, and one that has me on it
What?
as and I have one from the state of Indiana where I reside that has my name on it only. It
Wow.
says his appropriate place of birth, um,
So
but
someone seeing that version would see it and think that you gave birth to him.
if they don't know, it says delayed birth certificate.
Okay.
So they might know what that means, but probably they just think that that means it was issued later
Yeah, I
because,
I
we were
totally
out of the
would.
country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Okay. Like these just seem. It is amazing to me that this. I don't know. I'm gonna say this. I don't know if I should say it, but like it seems very disorganized for dealing with human life here. Like this is
Yes.
yeah, okay, all right, good. All right. Well, not good,
And I love
but
that
yeah.
someone who is not a stakeholder in this community can see that when we bring it to light.
I mean, it just seems so just it's messed up is really what I wanted to say something else, but I was just say it's messed up because that's just that's horrible. I mean, you already have parents, kids of you have all perspectives of this experience dealing with the emotions, the feelings, the logistics, all of it. And then to have something as what should be so simple, right? Like the paperwork as being very like just black and white, just sign the dotted line and that's one part that is also just like this cluster.
Oh, if we started to go into the paperwork um, needed for a child to change countries,
Yeah.
you would probably be appalled.
Yeah, no, I don't know that I want to know at this time, but I um
I have a great big box where I keep copies of all of it for
yeah.
him, but it's a great big box.
Yeah. So what happens to the kids who are in orphanages or foster care systems that that don't get adopted? What happens to them?
Um, I mean, statistically, if they are they will be aged out as an adolescent, so generally around 16. I mean, and I'm look
16.
globally, so this is going to
Okay.
be like
Okay. Mm-hmm.
very average. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be different in different places.
Mm-hmm.
They probably don't have full education. They probably don't have job skills. And what they don't have are supportive adult relationships. And so if you imagine yourself at 19, 20,
Right.
and how really capable were you of taking care of yourself?
Yeah.
And if something happened, if you blew a tire on the side of the highway and you had nobody to call,
Mm.
how stressful would that be?
Yeah. It'd be
Um,
stressful now.
yeah, I mean, I think that's what we don't think. Like being, you know, being in my mid 20s with a master's degree and like realizing like paying all the bills and doing this thing and then there was this, like accident and I have to deal with this. Like it was overwhelming
Yeah.
because you didn't really until you have practice doing those things, um, you don't know how to do those things.
Yeah.
And that's with support.
Yeah.
That's with really supportive parents and having, a job with a salary
Right.
and
And
things like that.
education and
And,
community. Yeah.
and then if we're thinking, so we have huge numbers of, um, addiction,
Mm.
crime, and we say crime, but we have to understand that's crime for survival or crime to feed an addiction, which is also emotional survival.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we need to like look at it in those ways. We see lots of early pregnancies and ending up back in a system in a
Mm.
different way. Um, and we see lots of early deaths.
Yeah. Ugh.
Yeah.
What are give me an idea if you know in the US like like how many kids are we talking that are potentially in that situation?
Oh,
Like ballpark.
um, I like thousands.
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 Tens of
I would
thousands.
have to look up
Yeah, I
numbers
know.
to
I
be
put you on the spot there, but it's like I guess I just want to understand for myself, and I can certainly go do my own research after this because I didn't think of it prior, but
Mhm.
just the true scope, of really
Yeah,
how
and I
big
can
this
probably
is.
I have some information. It just may take me a minute to scroll through and find where we're at. So I can probably bring that up. But what I want to also say is that even though I'm talking about these like potential death for kids who are leaving orphanages
Yeah.
worldwide, and considering that as like that's a really scary thing for people. Um, I'm not saying let's go out and adopt all those kids. Um,
Mm.
and so why? Um, well, partially because they may not actually be orphans.
Hmm.
And so just because they're in a place, it's so complicated. Um,
Yeah.
it's so complicated. If a children's home is founded, suddenly there are more children who need a home.
Oh,
So,
interesting.
and if because the children's home is here, that's going to provide things that maybe a family cannot,
Oh my goodness.
or
Wow.
maybe a family could, but so we have to recognize what's really going on, and that sometimes kids in children's homes may have family who visit them, and so the solution isn't like moving them into new families.
Right.
It's helping to support the original family that didn't feel like they had the financial means, or maybe they just didn't have the childcare means.
Right.
That I had to go to work, and so my kid stays here during the day.
Oh my goodness. This is like, oh, it's
Um,
it's heartbreaking, but it is so complicated.
it's so complicated, and so when we start adoption, in those places, then we're leaning towards, I mean, like it can be like it can be a slippery slope one way or the other. So we
Right.
have to be aware of what's really going on.
Mm,
And then when we think about the US, um, I do think there are lots of kids who are aging out of the system who do need the support of an adult. And whether that is as an adoptive parent or that is as like a mentor who can continue to be a support to them.
right.
And
Right.
so there are ways that we can serve children and families that doesn't isn't like adoption isn't the first answer.
Right. Yeah. Like I'm thinking of, you know, coaches, teachers, you can, the volunteering at different, organizations or after school programs, things like that, where you could be a presence for a child without fully going through the process of becoming their adoptive parent.
Right.
Hmm. Gosh,
Right.
so
There's so many
complicated.
things.
Yeah. Huh. So, uh, so I've talked a lot about, or I've asked a lot about things that might surprise me or that I may not know, but is there anything that truly surprises you about the work that you do or your experiences or just the adoption process or community in general?
Oh, okay. I know where to go with this. I mean, my first thought was, I've been doing this a hot minute. Not a lot surprises me anymore. Um, but you know what really, and it doesn't surprise me when I just think about people in general, but what really makes me sad is how much we cut ourselves off at the knees by I, by being overly defensive and being overly in our camps. So even as I said what I was saying before, just a minute before, I'm aware that there are people going, yeah, well, you're an international adoptive parent. And like I'm aware that there are people who are listening, or who may be listening because they'll see that I share this,
Hmm.
and have those kinds of, going beyond skepticism. And because my child's story is my child's story, I can't explain to you why, maybe in this one case, but I'm not here to defend myself either. And I'm total like that's I feel very strongly as in my work in this area, like I'm not here to defend myself.
Hmm.
Not because that means I think I'm right. That means because it's okay if I'm wrong, and it's
Hmm.
okay that um, I'm still learning, and we're all still learning.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm sad that there are going to be people who are always going to be skeptical, not of me, but of all adoptive parents,
Yeah.
um, and who could influence adoptive parents to create a better situation for those who are children now, but have their own defensiveness for their own reasons, which are really great reasons, but then can't reach each other. And
Mm.
so we end up in these camps of adoptive parents listen to adoptive parents and adoptees listen to adoptees, and
Interesting.
birth parents listen to birth parents,
Right.
and sometimes we have a few crossovers, and then sometimes we have people yelling, you all should be listening to us.
Mm. Hmm.
And how much stronger we could be if we were united.
Yeah. Yeah. I think even on a smaller scale, I'm thinking of even when this like you said, when this goes out, if someone that is listening to my episodes and sees the title around adoption and goes, well, I don't have anything to do with that, I'm not going to listen, or why would I listen to that? And I think, a lot of why I wanted to have this conversation with you is because I'm really learning that, to have real empathy and to really be there for someone, or just makes have someone feel seen and heard is so valuable. And you have to be able to you have to come with some understanding, and or be willing to have the conversation to really achieve that. So, and I think that, just going back to my example before of, I meet you on the playground. It's probably not the first thing you're going to say to me. Hey, my son's adopted. Is yours? Like, no, that's not what the conversation we're going to have. But now that you and I have had this conversation, I know that the next time I'm at the playground, I'm not going to be as caught off guard if someone decides to share that with me. And for me, I think that's my first step. And then the homework and the reading, I've written down the couple of books that you mentioned. I mean, it's all part of the learning process. We can't learn everything all at once, right? But just being able to interact with someone on a very baseline and caring way is, I think, so important. I just went on a little tangent there, but
being able to listen to a person, regardless if it's someone of the opposite political affiliation or it's someone who is not a stakeholder when you are a stakeholder, or maybe someone who is an opposite stakeholder. But being able to understand, your hurts and your priorities and your passions can do everything in helping us meet a need.
Right. Brooke, is there anything that you would have asked yourself that I didn't think to, or anything you really want to make sure that you have a chance to say to anyone listening today?
Wow, that's a great question. I will go with, I have so many little soapboxes in this realm. But I'm going to go with the one that came up through Instagram today, is that adoptive parents go to therapy. Don't put your kid in therapy. I'm not saying don't put your kid in therapy, but your first priority should to put yourself in therapy. And, then we can determine if therapy makes sense for your child. But therapy should never be something that they are forced into. You're going to make it really hard for them to go to therapy when they are able to get something out of it. But if they don't have an interest in it, it's probably not going to be particularly helpful, where you as an adult can learn to manage your stress, to get validation, to get new ideas. And, this parenting and trauma is not for the faint of heart. And you can't do it like you were raised.
Yeah.
So you probably need a lot of support. And, I'm someone who teaches these things, and I'm in therapy.
Yeah.
And I would not give it up, because how am I going to best meet my child's needs? And I would say this to biological parents too. How are you going to best meet your child's needs if you are a human? Like, you've just got to keep doing the work to keep moving yourself forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's my whole mission. That's my whole point and I'm doing it for myself, and I'm trying to just help the masses understand that starting with yourself is where you need to be. Even whether that's for your kids or for your partner or for, anything, your body, your ambitions, all of it. It really starts with yourself and figuring yourself out first. Well, Brooke, thank you so much. I know that I asked a lot of big questions that you so gracefully answered in the best way possible. I know there were a lot of other directions you probably could have taken this, but so I really appreciate your time, and this was wonderful. Thank you.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me.
Oh man, so much I didn't know. Oh my goodness. This is one of those conversations that inspires me, but also enrages me and reminds me of how much work is yet to be done in this world. I remember being in therapy within days of interviewing Brooke, and I shared with my therapist how fired up I was about this topic. And, through her questioning and kind of just asking me what I was getting at and what I wanted to do about it, I remember saying, I want to do everything and I want to do it right now. But here's the thing. I also want to dismantle diet culture, revamp our education systems, help new moms. And then I remember that I'm one person. But I'm one person with a show who's talking to you, another person who knows more people. I know that at the very least, I will continue to learn more about adoption and interview more counselors and professionals like Brooke, but it's not enough. So I want to know, is this speaking to you? If it is, consider this the passing of the torch. Or is it diet culture that's pissing you off? Here's the torch. Take it. Run with it. I'm trying to encourage you to get involved with issues that move you, because while each of us is just one person and we can't do it all, we can each do something. Talking to Brooke was like, whoa, there are issues that I don't even know need more light shined on them. And I'm not trying to, get out of doing some work in this area, but I hope you get my point that I'm having all these conversations and I leave every single one of them, especially ones like this where I really knew next to nothing, feeling like, okay, I have to take action. And I just have to remember that I can only do so much. So I don't know. Adoption is so complicated, and I so appreciate Brooke taking the time to merely scratch the surface and explain some of the ins and outs. I have such a greater understanding of this world. I hope you do as well. I'm looking forward to learning more, and help me out. Pick up one of these topics, pick up one of these issues, run with it. I think I said this in my last outro. We can each make a difference, even if it's just within our little bubbles of the world. So thank you, Brooke, and thank you for listening. And now that I'm wrapping this up, I remember I also wanted to say that, you don't have to be on the front lines with Brooke fighting for adoption and advocacy and issues. But even as simple as taking time to talk to your own families about the fact that adoption is a thing. I know that there were kids that I grew up with, not many, but I know that there were a few throughout my lifetime that were adopted, and it always just felt like, we don't talk about it. And it was very secretive, and it was, I don't know. I don't ever remember like saying to my mom, "Hey, can we talk about this?" And so I'm not saying it was like, "Oh no, like a we don't talk about Bruno situation," but don't wait to be asked. Sit down with your kids. Hey, did you know that some kids are adopted, or some moms and dads adopt kids from other countries? And just start to have conversations. So when it comes up, like I was saying with Brooke at the park, when your kid is talking to another kid and they find out that kid's adopted, it's not like, whoa, what is this? Anyway, I don't know, just a small suggestion. And Brooke has resources. Brooke has a ton of resources. I'm going to link so much good stuff for you. We're just getting started on this topic, so stick with me. And now I'll actually say goodbye. Okay, bye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Sass Says is a production of Luann Nigara, Inc. This podcast is meant to be educational and not meant to replace professional therapy or professional medical attention. To learn more about today's show and what's new in my world, head over to sasssays.com. Thanks so much. Talk later.